even in error, there's a hunger for God. You have to approach with a lot of gentleness. You want to win the person, not the argument. I think a lot of atheists are really big on truth. And I have a lot of respect for that. A lot of atheists were willing to sacrifice relationships with their Christian family members, not because they wanted to, but because they believed passionately enough in the idea of truth. They felt the need to stand on that.
We're at the Catholic Creators Conference, of course, and wonderful opportunity to get to talk to you. And I wanted to pick your brain, or should I say mine, because brain is very materialistic, about atheism, specifically the idea of, we as Catholics want to be good evangelizers. And that's a real stalwart of a position that's very popular, the religious nuns out there. And so, let's just kind of springboard from there, and we can,
Wonderful. Yeah, like in terms of what to say in response to atheists.
What to say, how Catholics should be going about this, whether they should be rigorously philosophically trained, and if not, what their options are.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot. With any framework that you're wanting to confront, it's good to know the particulars of what a person believes in.
Yeah.
And it's good to know as much as you can about the person themselves, in terms of maybe how rigorous they are, how deep do they want to go in this, how much have they thought about, any of this stuff, because it controls a little bit the kind of arguments you're going to make. So, for instance, with atheism, knowing whether the person is a materialist or not, in the sense of thinking everything is just matter, you kind of alluded to that with the mind-brain thing. Overwhelmingly, most atheists are. And materialism doesn't work for a variety of reasons, but you will have a handful of atheists who try to take the position that they're immaterial realities. And so an argument against materialism is going to work against most forms of atheism, but not all. And so knowing the other person is important for having a good conversation. And then, just by way of preamble, obviously, do all of this in the spirit of charity, doing this in a way where you're trying to lead one another into the truth rather than just bashing their head with the truth. But I think there's a few ways that I've found that can be helpful in sort of opening the door for a new way of thinking. Because a lot of what we're looking for, it's not that you're going to hit on some Bible verse or some factoid that completely changes their mind overnight. That occasionally can happen.
And it's not to your credit.
Right. I mean, God can work through whatever. And you'll hear these very strange and surprising stories of conversion all the time. So clearly those things can happen, but you can't really predict or cause those things. Like those things, God is just going to do what he's going to do in fun and weird and exciting ways. But you can do what you can to try to get the other person to be open to a new way of understanding reality that can open themselves up to the truth. So I'd give a couple ways. One is I like to use a sort of simplified version of the argument from Contingency. And that one, a lot of people are scared of it at first because it sounds very technical to talk about contingent and non-contingent things. But the idea is simple enough that you don't exist in all possible universes. You didn't always exist. You won't always exist. You exist under certain conditions. You need air and water and, all these things, food. You needed your parents. You needed all, like 1,000 other conditions, more than 1,000 other conditions had to be in place for you to exist. And if any one of your ancestors didn't exist, you wouldn't be here. And if any of these factors that help to sustain you right now stopped existing, like if food just blinked out of existence today, you would die. If air blinked out of existence, so you are sustained by a bunch of different things. You could describe that in a couple different ways. If someone was more mathematically minded, you could say like A only exists under conditions X, Y, and Z. But then the problem is each of those conditions is also conditional. So air only exists on this earth because of all sorts of complicated reasons. Your parents only met each other because they were brought into existence and they had air and water and everything else. And so all of our conditions only existed under their own X, Y, and Z kind of condition. Well, here's the problem. You can't just have that go on to infinity. Because if you just say everything that's ever existed was conditional, well, then nothing would ever exist because conditional things require some pre-existing thing to bring them into existence.
See, I've seen people bite the bullet on this, and I think it's irrational because I don't think the contingent series can go on infinitely. But
Right.
they'll just say, well, you do the same thing with God, you know?
No, but see this, and I'm glad you posed this. So here's how you would draw that distinction. I use the example of a train car.
Mm-hmm.
So this works for the argument from motion or the argument from contingency. The same kind of imagery works. A boxcar isn't responsible for its own motion and its own, like, it's not responsible for where it is on the track.
Yeah.
But it is responsible for where the next one is on the track. Like, it is pulling it along, but it doesn't pull itself along.
You're right.
And so if you came to an intersection and you saw trains whizzing by, going uphill, say, you would know, as a matter of fact, like, okay, well, even though I'm only seeing boxcars, it can't only be boxcars.
Right.
And if somebody said, well, maybe it's an infinitely long train, well, then it has to have an incredibly powerful engine to have an infinite number of boxcars that it's pulling along. Like, you're not solving the need for an engine car.
Yeah.
The longer you make the train series, the more you need a powerful engine at the front of that.
That's super interesting you frame it that way, because Aquinas in the Third Way and 1 through 3, he talks about it as a regression, a series into the past. But you're saying, well, I mean, so I would just, postulate it as, there had to be some beginning if you see movement now, same way that Aquinas sets it up, but you're flipping it. Like, there has to be something that dragged them along. They can't drag themselves along.
And in fact, I think the way that both motion and contingency get understood is just in terms of temporal causality.
Mm-hmm.
Aquinas is actually fine with the idea of an infinitely old world. Now, Bonaventure and others aren't. We don't have to get into which side is right on that. Yeah. But his argument doesn't require any kind of particular timeline, because even right now, you are held in place by contingent forces. That even if they're not temporally prior to you or logically prior, we don't have to get into all of that. But there is a possibility to just say, because look, let's get this very clear. Everything we see is contingent. Like, every material thing you've ever come into contact with is contingent. It only exists under certain conditions and in certain ways and so on. And you can imagine it going out of existence. Okay, so we know there must be something else holding everything we see in existence. The engine pulling the boxcars. And we also know it can't be any of the things that we see, because we only see boxcars.
What do you do with someone who just doesn't feel the pull of that intuition?
I think then you move to a different argument.
Okay.
Because look, an argument can be logically valid and not persuasive.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like, there are plenty of arguments where someone says, I don't see the problem with it, but I'm not personally drawn to that or compelled by it.
Yep.
So there's a few others that are worth talking about. I actually think simulation theory is a really worthwhile.
I saw your video on this, and I was very fascinated by the 3 arguments I think you had. It was just wonderful. Yeah. I recommend watching it.
Kind of cutting to the chase, the whole thing turns on if materialism is true. If materialism is true, then we should be able to create artificial intelligence that is real intelligence, real sentience, and people spending billions on AI research are convinced they can do this. Like, this is a philosophical error that is costing enormous sums of money. Turns out philosophy is very important for saving billions of dollars. So if you believe that the brain is just a machine and sentience is just a set of material things interacting, we can build material things. Like, we could build an artificial organ. And so if sentience is just tied to an organ, then at some point in the future, we'll be able to build an artificial organ. And we can create universes in which these brains think that they are alive. And incredibly complicated computer code probably wouldn't be like a physical brain. It'd be like a line of computer code or a language learning model or something. Well, if that's the case, you could have a virtually infinite number of those artificial minds that think that they're alive. But once you grant that premise, then you say, well, the odds that I'm actually alive rather than the nearly infinite number of deluded brains that think they're alive. Well, statistically, you are almost certainly living in a simulation. You don't live in reality. And you have no way of testing this to know which reality you're
Such a sneaky argument.
It is
so
such
weird.
a sneaky argument.
Because when you were presenting it, before you got that premise, you're like, yeah, most probably you're one of these fictitious entities. I'm like, I don't know. And then you explained it a little bit more the way you just did. And I was like, probabilistically, you're right. Yeah.
And this is, Nick Bostrom. This was his kind of argument. So if you accept the premises of materialism, you have to say, well, then it is a nearly 100% chance that I don't live in reality.
Yeah.
And someone who says, like, my philosophy leads to a near 100% chance that I don't live in reality is announcing to the world, I have a completely illogical philosophy. I mean, it's internally logical, but it leads to such an absurd result that it's like, okay, well, under my view, reality says you're living in a delusion. And under your view, you're living in a delusion. So the one thing we can actually agree on is you have a delusional worldview.
Yeah. Wow, yeah. And so that's one good argument. You say you had a third, maybe?
Yeah, I think like the arguments from morality. Because even people who, again, this depends very much on the kind, like, you know, like you've got people who are atheists who are much more like engineering, computer science, et cetera, background, who the argument I just gave, or is it going to appeal to them? You have people from more of a philosophy background. You've got people who aren't particularly academic at all, but they have a strong sense of like good and evil, and maybe they reject God because they're like, look at all the evil stuff God has done, and I hold him morally responsible for that and all that.
Yeah.
To really dig into that, to say, okay, what do we mean by good and evil?
Yeah.
And where does good and evil come from? Should be a good way of pointing to the existence of God. Because if good and evil are just evolutionary constructs, like this is just the kind of stuff we've been evolved to feel, there's no reason we have to listen to our feelings or our innate impulses or anything else. Like every day, you ignore animalistic desires you may have.
Yeah.
Because you say, these aren't good for me. Maybe you even ignore things that are good biological desires.
Right.
Like everyone who contracepts is fighting against one of the most primal biological urges, which is the propagation of your own genes and the human species. So if you're someone who is, you know, contracepting and stopping all of that from happening, you can't colorably turn around and say we have to listen to biological urges when it comes to morality.
Yeah.
This leads to a kind of fork in the road, because the possible origins of morality, very broadly speaking, are biological, social, or divine, or transcendental. If it's biological, we've just seen, you can ignore that. If it's social, that's worse, because a society can have bad morals, like Jim Crow or Nazi Germany or something like this. And so people can stand up to the prevailing morality of their day and appeal to a higher moral standard. Now, if you read like the letter from the Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King makes this argument very explicitly, that we judge the laws of man by this higher judge, the laws of God. And you have to be able to appeal to a morality above culture to be able to critique culture. But then if people are going to complain about God's actions in the Bible, then they can't be saying, well, God's actions don't match our human DNA or our human society, because who cares?
Yeah.
Like God's ways are above your ways. So those become incredibly weak critiques of God. If you just say God doesn't act like a 21st century American, that sounds like more of a critique of 21st century America than a critique of God.
I'm so glad you raised that, because I see this a lot, and it's natural. It's a natural reaction, the idea that, well, what God in the Old Testament is just horrific, and by my standards, you know, I'm going to judge that. And it's like, they don't realize that they're living within a certain bubble. And
that's
the way that you phrased it was really good.
Yeah, the first chapter of After Virtue by Alistair McIntyre, I think, does a good job of showing that we have accepted on some level two incompatible beliefs. On the one hand, people just think, oh, you've got your truth, I've got my truth, you've got your moral code, I've got my moral code. But we also absolutely morally judge people who, you know, if somebody says, well, I happen to be a racist. Like, this is just, I feel very strongly that racism is good. We're not like, hey, you do you.
Right.
So that coexist only works when it's various forms of okay with sort of secular liberal conclusions. And the minute somebody has some personal beliefs that don't harmonize with that well, it isn't just let's just coexist and you be racist, I'll be not racist. Right. Like, no, it's like, no, we have an actual clash of values, an actual clash of ideas. And that's important to be able to navigate, not just for like social cohesion, more importantly, because there is actual right and wrong. There is truth. Like the person who is upset because they think God was behaving immorally in the Old Testament is pointing to a deep belief in truth and in goodness. And they're misapplying this in their assessment of God, but they're right to have a deep belief in truth and goodness. And so being able to build on that, I think is super important. You know, you've got to, I go back to something Blaise Pascal says in the Pensée, where he talks about if you wish to correct another with advantage, you have to first see from which perspective he views the matter, and then affirm to him what he's getting right.
Yes.
And then show him the part that he's not seeing.
Yeah.
So being able to say, like, yes, it is good that you believe in a morality above the level of our society, above the level even of our species. That's good.
Yes.
But here's the thing. That can only exist in a world with a God who is above our humanity.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we've got no way of accounting for where that good and evil comes from.
Yeah.
Like, the notion of good and evil can't be something that's just our own ideas. Or else, it would just be me saying the equivalent of, God likes things that I don't like.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly what it is.
Like, he makes people that I don't like. But no one would look at that and say, yeah, that's an indictment of God.
That means he doesn't
of
exist
me.
somehow. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
God can't exist because he made people who annoy me.
Yeah, there's a few missing steps there.
Right.
Yeah.
And so morality, we intuit this, really fleshing out. Morality is not just a statement of objective or of subjective preferences or dislikes.
Yeah.
Like, the difference between I hate strawberry ice cream and I hate genocide is it's an actual difference of kind and not degree.
Yeah, because you're so right. Yeah, because when people want to take morality and just embed it in subjective preferences, I think the most they can say, at least in conversations I've had and what I've read, is just, well, I hold these preferences really strongly. And it's just not sufficient.
No, because you've got people who have, like, food allergies who, like, I can't eat a peanut or it'll kill me.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's still not a moral judgment.
Right, yeah.
And so these are a different kind of... Now, you can go even deeper and say the whole kind of emotivist view of language, of the way good and evil works, it's just not true as a description of language. Now, I don't know how deep in the weeds you want to get on this, but like Peter Geach's On Good and Evil is very helpful for showing this. That across cultures, good doesn't just mean I like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It means something related to a telos or an ent.
Yep.
So you can say somebody is a good car thief. Like, they're really good at stealing cars.
Yep.
I'm not saying I like that they steal cars.
Right.
I may hate it, but they're good at it.
There's an excellence there.
Right.
Yeah.
And saying, Tom Brady's a good quarterback doesn't mean I'm a Patriots fan.
Right.
Or, Tampa Bay fan.
Or you're approving of anything.
Exactly. It's
you're
not
recognizing excellence.
Right. And someone who doesn't care not just about that player, but about the sport could still say, I could say Michael Jordan is a good basketball player. I'm not a basketball fan at all. I've got no strong preference for or against Jordan.
Yeah.
It's just, he's objectively good at what he does.
Yeah. All this to say, emotivism or this strong preferencing, this is just not going to be sufficient.
Right,
story
because all of those assume that good and evil language refers to a subjective set of likes and dislikes, when in fact, the way good and evil works linguistically is as an objective set. So then you say, okay, so if I know what it means to be a good shortstop, it's good at being a shortstop. Or I know what a good screwdriver is.
Yeah.
Well, a good man only makes sense if a man, like a screwdriver or a shortstop, also has a purpose, an end, a telos. And this only makes sense if he has a creator. Because if he doesn't, if he's just an accident doesn't have a telos.
Right.
Like, you wouldn't say, oh yeah, that spill on the ground is a really good spill.
Yeah,
I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
It's like, what? It seems like just a completely meaningless combination of words.
Yeah.
You might happen to like the spill on the ground for some inexplicable reason, but it wouldn't be good in any objective sense. But you can talk about a good man or an evil man, and people understand what that means because we realize we are meant to be a certain way, and some of us do a really good job of becoming the way we're meant to be, and some of us don't.
Yeah, and you see people kind of waffle between this subjective, and then they'll start to place it, well, he's good because society recognizes him as good or something, and you get this blending, and that's what frustrates me.
Yeah.
When you talk to atheists, they have no dogma that centralizes and focuses all of them. So you've said a couple things here that covers maybe 90% of them, but then there are ones that are just, in this modern day individualistic buffet approach to just ideologies, I just pick what I like. Right. You get a lot of internally inconsistent beliefs.
Right. Yeah. So I think this is where gently listening and trying to point out the internal contradictions, because I think the things to listen for are this switch between the objective and the subjective in ways that are contradictory.
Yep.
Where I don't happen to like X, but you do, and therefore you're actually evil. We live in a very moralistic society, even maybe especially, among secular and atheistic people, where I think if you look at the events of the last several years, like if you have a different political set of views than they do, or a different, they're ready to aggressively police those things and hound people out of society. And if you say the wrong thing, or, saying something that is outdated or inappropriate or whatever else, like they will mercilessly go after people, which suggests a very strong belief system.
Absolutely.
But they don't just say it's all subjective. This is just my will to power, because then they're just saying that they're like petty tyrants.
It's just arbitrary at that point.
So then they cloak it under, this is a universal set of things. You should know better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the switch between this is universal and it's true of everyone, and this is just my own personal thing.
Yeah.
Listen for that, because it comes up quite a bit. And I think people are often not aware what they're doing as they're making the switch, because I think they've been taught, I know for a fact, in a lot of schools, they do this, which things are beliefs and which things are facts, which is a terrible way of trying to understand reality.
Yeah.
And is not actually, something like God exists. Is that a belief or a fact? Well, it's actually a fact and a belief.
Yeah.
Turns out, like, it's going to rain tomorrow.
Yeah.
Is a prediction. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
let me ask you.
Fact versus belief is just not a good way of understanding reality.
Yeah. So when you notice them making the switch, and this gets into a little bit of care and technique and so on of who you're speaking with, which is hard to do, by the way, if you're like speaking generally to an audience, you have a platform or something like that. Like it's almost impossible to speak individually. But suppose you have somebody there individually that you're speaking with. It's got to be more than just aha, look what you did.
Right.
So what do you recommend then?
So, okay, I think a few things. One, if you're speaking to an audience, you can speak in the kind of generalities we have been, where maybe it's 90%.
Which you have to.
Right. Yeah. And people are actually in some ways more open to that, because even if they've made that same mistake, when you're not attacking them personally, you're just saying somebody might say that.
Right.
Then the next time they start to do that, they're like, aha, I shouldn't do that.
It's a bit Socratic too, because they learn it to recognize it in themselves.
Yeah. Right. Because you have a little more space to take that correction when it doesn't feel very personal.
Right.
So the crowd is sometimes actually easier. When talking to a person, as you say, you want to win the person, not the argument. Yeah. And so you have to approach with a lot of gentleness. And I think you can gently probe the moral questions to point to their own belief in moral objectivity. Because most people, even if they say they don't believe in moral objectivity, do.
Yeah. Yep.
Like if you say you're completely subjective, so are you okay with, say, a group of neo-Nazis just coming up and taking a lot of political power because they have their own beliefs? I know it's what you and I may like, but potato. And nobody bites that. Nobody is like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Immediately they revert to, well, no, there's some beliefs you just can't hold. Yeah. Okay, so it looks like you both believe there's some moral objectives. Maybe there's some wiggle room where there's some gray area. We don't know what all of the objectives are. We don't have to sort that out now.
Yeah.
But it sounds like we agree.
If there's at least one, then subjectivism is false.
But so notice what we're doing there is like you emphasize the points of agreement. So rather than saying, aha, I got you, you say, it looks like you and I agree on moral objectivity. Now the person's not being indicted. They're being invited.
Yeah.
And that's much easier to accept.
That's true.
And so then they start realizing, okay, maybe we have a little more common ground than I thought we did.
Yeah.
And likewise, if somebody, attacks God and they've just completely misread the Bible, it's fine to say, I think you and I agree that kind of behavior would be completely inappropriate. Now, I don't actually read the Bible that way. I don't actually think that's what's going on in the Bible.
Yeah.
But if I read the Bible like you do, I would probably be revolted. And so I think we can agree on these moral things. And one of the things it does is it reminds them that you're also a person who's like moral.
Yeah.
And, because it's easy to take that for granted about yourself.
Is.
Like, of course I love truth. Of course I love goodness.
Yeah.
But if they don't know you and maybe haven't given you a ton of benefit of the doubt, finding those points of commonality and agreement is really good at kind of building up the goodwill. That then if you have a disagreement down the road, you've already had enough yeses that they can't just be like, what a monster.
Yeah. I think Kierkegaard said something about, love is seeing, like, it's like anticipating what one is going to say is good or something. I'm butchering the paraphrase even, but that you think, you expect them to say something good,
Right.
So, yeah.
And it doesn't mean that they're right about everything.
Building up that rapport.
Exactly. Yeah. Getting the rapport and seeing, like, what is the true or good thing they're grasping for,
Yeah.
even if they're missing it. Getting what they're trying to get,
Yeah.
and then helping, maybe steelmanning their thing to point towards that, rather than just treating them like a complete buffoon or an idiot or
Of
a
course.
monster or
Yeah.
something. There's a line that I go back to a lot from this mid-19th century or mid-1940s book called The World, the Flesh, and Father Smith. It's a detective priest. And he says, the man who knocks at the door of the brothel is unconsciously looking for God. That even in
Interesting.
sin, there is a hunger for God.
Yeah.
And even in error, there's a hunger for God.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
to be able to say, and this is the hard work, especially in a conversation where maybe it's a fast-paced conversation.
Yep.
It's easier in something like writing where you can be a little more deliberative.
Of course.
To really try to understand what is the good or the true or the beautiful thing that is behind what they're grasping for.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's easier to find than others. I think a lot of atheists are really big on truth. And I have a lot of respect for that. Like, a lot of atheists were willing to sacrifice relationships with their Christian family members.
Yeah.
Not because they wanted to, but because they believed passionately enough in the idea of truth. Even when they were wrong, they felt the need to stand on that. Now, some of that might have been like youthful hubris, etc.
Of course.
But you can draw out the good there of like, well, you should be willing to sacrifice for the truth.
Yeah.
All the more reason to make sure we are really doing it for the truth and that we have a good understanding of the truth.
Yeah.
But that actually gives us something to talk about. It's actually, it's much easier to talk to that person than the person who just shrugs and is like,
Just
I
apathetic.
don't really care. I'm just going to watch TV.
Yeah. So I also notice a behavior we haven't talked about yet, that is just skeptical to a fault,
Yes.
and just won't accept anything. But it's not necessarily a cognitive or intellectual position. It's more of a temperamental thing.
Yeah.
So like, no matter what you present, and I could be this way if I wanted to, but like,
It's
I
easy to be
recognize the really negative consequences of
Right.
doing this. I'm not going to come about any truths or anything, but it's a negative approach, so that whatever you put in front of them, they're just going to break it down. What do you do with somebody like that?
Yeah, I think trying to get them to articulate some positive vision of reality.
Which they're going to resist, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because even there, you can show them that a universal acid won't be contained in any container.
Yeah.
It'll just destroy everything, including the thing you're trying to hold it in. So
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
use a universal acid on Christianity of skepticism. Trying to use a universal acid of skepticism on Christianity,
Yeah.
you can also use that on skepticism.
Right.
So the person who says,
Doubt your doubts. In other
yeah,
words.
exactly,
Yep.
doubt your doubts.
Yeah.
If they say like, we can't know anything about reality, well, you'd have to know all of reality to know that.
Yeah.
To even say, I don't know anything about reality, you have to know yourself to know that.
Right.
Because I couldn't say, you don't know anything about reality unless I know something about you.
That's true.
And so we don't think of those as knowledge claims, but they are knowledge claims.
Yeah.
And as knowledge claims, they disprove a radical skepticism, which, it's certainly at least a universal
You
kind of radical
at least know
skepticism.
some things. Yeah.
Right. And so then we say, okay, what kind of things can we know? And what does it mean to know? And so on. What are the thresholds of knowledge? Because someone who's going to say to know something requires this kind of knowledge.
Yeah.
Those are all epistemological kind of claims.
Right.
So somebody says, well, the only things we really know are like lab things that we can prove with a double-blind test. That is a claim about reality that is not a lab claim that you can prove with a double-blind test.
Yeah.
So it's self-refuting.
Yeah.
So a lot of skepticism works like that, where it isn't actually a coherent thing to believe in. Like, you can't believe in skepticism.
Yeah.
You can be skeptical about the truth, but skepticism itself isn't true.
Yeah.
And so you should be skeptical about skepticism.
That's true. Now, along the same vein, you see people wanting to define atheism a certain way just to be lack of belief and sort of, I don't have the burden of proof. I have nothing to prove. And if you try to put it on me, I'm just going to resist that. And so,
yeah, it's absurd. I mean, you wouldn't say Holocaust denial is a lack of belief about the Holocaust, and therefore there's no need to prove it.
Yeah.
It's like, no. Like, saying that a thing didn't happen or saying that something doesn't exist is as much a claim as saying that it does exist.
It's an existence claim. It's a claim about reality as it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, take this. There are either an even or an odd number of stars.
Yeah.
Leave aside, we can't actually know. But somebody just says, like, Oh, I don't affirm that there's an odd number of stars, but I don't believe there's an even number. So you have to prove there's an even
number. Yeah.
Is obviously just playing games with language.
Yeah, of course.
Because they are affirming the only logical opposite. Like it has to be one of those two. Well, likewise, there either is or is not a God. And whether you believe there is or whether you believe there is not, those are both positive claims about reality.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, I understand where they can say, I don't know how to fulfill this claim. Like, how would I possibly prove there is no God?
Right.
Because it's a bad claim, and therefore it'd be very hard to prove.
Sure.
But that's a reason not to be an atheist.
Yeah.
But they've redefined atheism to be agnosticism.
Yeah.
Like, the whole point of agnosticism is you are without knowledge, gnosis.
Yeah.
Whereas atheism claims that we are without God, theism.
Yep.
And so to just pretend that atheism and agnosticism are the same thing is just dishonest.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just actually not true.
Yeah.
And it's also not true that it's impossible to prove a negative, because there are plenty of contexts in which you can prove a negative.
Yeah. Name a couple.
Okay, sure. The Christian claim Jesus makes is, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. There is, and there's no other God besides God. God says this like to Moses.
Mm-hmm.
So if God exists, then another God does not exist.
Mm-hmm.
That's a negative. There isn't another creator.
Yeah.
There can't be multiple creators that are infinite and equally powerful and all of that.
Yep.
We can prove all those things by negation.
Yeah.
We can prove that there's not poisonous gas in this room by the fact that we're alive. So there's plenty of things you can prove the negation of very easily. This notion that you can't prove a negative is just not true.
You can prove there's no milk in the fridge by opening the fridge or something.
You can prove that there are no even prime numbers greater than 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like all of that can be proved with the right approaches and setup.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of things. And so it's a lack of imagination and a lack of understanding of the way proof works.
Sort of in dogmatic entrenchment, and that I'm comfortable here. I don't need to prove anything. I've been told I don't need to prove anything, so I'm happy with that. Yeah.
I think it's in some ways kind of a dumbed down version of Karl Popper of, like falsifiability. But falsifiability isn't the only way we know things.
Exactly.
Like mathematics doesn't work by falsifiability.
Yep.
And Popper knew this. Like Popper is trying to demarcate a certain kind of approach and a certain approach towards knowledge by the natural sciences vis-a-vis other fields.
Yeah.
But people took away that we can never know anything is verified. We can only know things is falsified. We can never prove a negative. And these things are just like these popular mantras that with a few minutes thought are like, none of these are true.
That's great. It's another thing in your tool bag, I suppose, that you can just have there if anybody ever raises it. You're like, okay, I've thought about this. I want to offer this to you to think about it. But anyway, we're running out of time. We got to wrap up. Joe, it's been such a pleasure. And I've certainly learned a lot. And I know anybody who's going to watch this is going to learn a lot as well.
Wonderful. This was a lot of fun to do.
Yeah.
I like it.
I appreciate your time. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right.